following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back talking sports in the zone. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we have just two of us tonight, three of us all together. Hal Bock is here. Hello, Hal.
Hi, everybody.
And David Hubler is here.
Good evening.
Good evening, David. And the baseball season is winding down.
Very quickly.
One of your teams is still in it, David. The Washington Nationals. And turns out they're not your favorite team. You're a Yankee fan, always was, always were. But I want to ask you, when you wrote your book, The Nats and the Grays, did you become closer to becoming a Nats fan? Did you kind of start identifying with them?
I started identifying more with the action that was going on, not necessarily even on the baseball field, but the action that was going on in D.C. during the war. I had my mother's two brothers had moved down to this area, and both had served in the Second World War. So that was another link for me. But yeah, it's funny. We've talked in the past sometimes about collecting baseball cards and things like that. And my second favorite team growing up was the Washington Senators, because their uniforms were very much like the Yankee pinstripe uniforms. And so I was not totally disappointed when I'd buy a pack of Topps baseball cards with the gum in it, and and I'd get a couple of like Sam Mealy and people like that from the Washington Senators. So I sort of had a interest in them, but it was more when I originally started to write the novel about a ball player here during the war that I really got interested in the team. And the one thing I discovered was, they really weren't all that bad during the war, despite what people seem to think.
Yeah, they damn near won the pennant in 43. Am I correct about that?
And 45, yeah. Mm-hmm.
45?
Yeah. They lost by one game in 45, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up a few years, 2 or 3 years after you. They were never really good in the 50s.
No, they were not.
And I'm rooting for Washington in this World Series because of all the fans in baseball, and I was one of them, and you were two of them, Hal Bock. We lost our teams once.
Yes, we did. Somebody just sent me a video today. A friend of mine just sent me a video today, 45 minutes from 1949 of the New York Giants, an instructional video, how to pitch, how to play third base, with all of the players that I remember from that era. And it was just so touching. It really was. Plus, they played the song, the theme song. We're calling all fans, all you Giant Ball fans, come watch the home team going places, round those bases, cheer for your favorites out at Coogan's Bluff. You'll see those polo grounders do their stuff. That song was written by Horace Stoneham in one of his lucid moments. And boy, I loved that song when I was a kid. I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And this was a very heartwarming video for me to look at today.
You didn't like Meet the Mets? Come on out and greet the Mets?
No, I could do without that. I also could do without Mr. Met. I didn't need him either.
Yeah, I always thought New York baseball was a little cut above, the trashy sort of stuff like the Philly Fanatic and the San Diego Chicken. I don't like it to see. I don't like to see it in Washington, so I certainly didn't like to see it in New York. And I was glad that in those years that they really didn't have cheerleaders or people running around dressed as the president.
I'll tell you a funny story about the chicken. They brought the chicken to Shea Stadium during the Dark Ages, which we had frequently went through the Dark Ages at Shea Stadium, and they had a promotion. They brought the chicken in. So I thought, well, that should be fun. I'll talk to the chicken and bring him into the press room, and I'll talk to him. So they brought the chicken in, San Diego chicken. His name is Ted Giannoulis. Ted Giannoulis comes up to me, and I introduce myself to him, and he said, my God, I was your biggest fan. Growing up, I read your stuff in Canada. He was a Canadian. Growing up, I read all of your stuff in Canada. So my number one fan was the San Diego chicken. I don't know what that means, but it's a fact of life, you know.
Yeah, no, it must have made you feel really good.
It did.
Sure.
It did. I enjoyed the moment. Believe me, I did. I can use all the fans I can get. You know, I mean, I need fans wherever I can find them.
No, you got all the fans right here. Let me tell you how.
Well, that's good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let me tell you my experience with the chicken. I was the Tops representative in the 80s and 90s, and I would go around to these minor league teams, and one of the people who had a gig doing just that was the chicken. And we would run into each other 4 or 5 times a season, him doing his thing. But what I remember, I don't remember having any dealings with him, but his manager was a guy by the name of Miller, and this is going back 40 years. My God. It's 35 maybe. But he was such a nice guy, and you meet people on along the baseball trail, and you remember them, and I don't remember him being anything necessarily related to the chicken or any of that, but just a nice guy, baseball fan, a guy you talk to. And that's one of the real advantages of loving this sport is you go to a game or you chat, and in Hal's case, he talks to somebody he either knew or can talk about those years, and it's instant camaraderie, and that's wonderful. The relationships, 2 people in the stands one can be a Republican, one can be a Democrat. Well, he can't be a Republican in today's day and age, but an old Republican was fine when an old Republican was just like a Democrat, and a Democrat was just like an old Republican. We've become polarized, and sports brings us together, and let's hope it plays a hand in something.
Yeah, I have a story that exemplifies just what you were talking about, Ralph. Years ago, when the Orioles used to play in Memorial Stadium, when I was at Voice of America, I used to cover the opening day. I'd go up there, and I'd get a field pass and things like that. So I forget, I don't remember what year it was, but the interesting thing was they had a couple of places that on the overhang, on the mezzanine level, they had this area that several of these they were like they had enough for 2 chairs. Okay, and now I don't know why I wound up sitting there than at a seat in the stands. But I was sitting there, and there was an older gentleman there who got there first. And, of course, like everything else, we started to talk. And he was, at the time, he seemed ancient. He probably was maybe a year or so older than I am now, or maybe not even. But anyway, the point was we started to talk. And just 2 guys literally hanging out over the stands talking baseball. And it came about that he had been a press photographer for many years, and that's how they gave him passes wherever he went. And he was the photographer who took that iconic picture of Babe Ruth's back, you know, where the number 3 is clearly visible on Babe Ruth Day at the stadium. He took that iconic picture, which I think
fine.
I guess
not fine.
Okay.
And
I didn't remember.
I think he worked for the Herald Tribune here in New York.
Yeah, and he was just telling me, I just was in awe. But I mean, and frankly, I've forgotten a lot of the things he told me. But just the camaraderie of the two of us, age differences and things. But boy, when he started to talk baseball, it was like we had met as children.
Yeah. Baseball is a universal language.
When you mentioned the Herald Tribune, the first thing that comes to mind for me was Red Smith.
Of course.
Can you tell me something about Red Smith? Tell us all something about Red Smith.
First of all, Red Smith was not a columnist. He was an essayist. He wrote flowingly, beautiful prose, under the gun often, covering a game, and he was the dictionary definition of a great baseball writer. And everybody who I knew wanted to grow up to be Red Smith. That said, you would think that he was an exalted guy and he would be standoffish with young people. He wasn't. He was the friendliest guy you could imagine. He would come up to you and say, "What's your name? Oh, you're on the beat now? Oh, that's great," And I remember that moment when he introduced himself to me, or I introduced myself to him, and it was like a chill ran through me that this is Red Smith and I'm just Hal Bock, I'm a kid from the Bronx, and this is Red Smith. So it was a great moment in my life to meet him, although it was near the end of his life and his writing time. But he was an essayist. He wrote just the most beautiful stuff, and he wrote it under the gun. He wrote it on deadline often, and it was just beautiful stuff. He's a beautiful writer.
Hey, Hal, I have a question to ask you.
As a kid who read him daily, because our elementary school offered the choice of two newspapers in the morning. We could either get the Times for a dime, or I think it was a dime a week, or the Herald Tribune. And as a kid, I picked the Herald Tribune with Red Smith. What gratifies me is that, and you guys must, that all of our heroes, it's been said, have clay feet. And there's nothing more frustrating than to root for somebody or to like somebody or care for somebody, and then it turns out he's a jerk. You meet him or what have you.
I was thinking of Cassius Clay.
Okay. It would be Cassius Clay's feet. That's silly. But it's nice to know he was a nice guy, and that caring for him.
He was a gentleman. And it's funny. I came along at a time when baseball writers wore a tie and jacket to the ball game, like you were dressed like you were going to a wedding or something, And that evolved during my career to a time when baseball writers would show up wearing Bermuda shorts, and Now that wasn't me. I would always be dressed properly for a baseball game, and Red Smith always dressed properly for a baseball game. It was almost like you were going to church, or synagogue. It was an experience, a religious experience. At least that's the way I treated it. A baseball game in those days was a very important day, a very important moment during the day, and I treated it as such. And Red Smith always did. So did people like Dave Anderson, who also worked with Red at the New York Times later in his career. I admired these guys. These were my heroes. These were who I wanted to be. These were the men I wanted to be. Now, I don't think I ever achieved that, but they were my heroes. They were fabulous individuals and writers. And I looked at my craft And I said, I want to be a good writer. I want to be a good guy. And I tried to achieve both those goals, and I think I did.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Thank you,
Dan. I have a question for you, Hal, because you may know this. A number of years ago, I was talking sports writing with a colleague of mine who's now no longer with us, but he put me on to, he said, you want to read great sports writing? He says, you're not going to believe it's even sports writing. And it's probably a topic you don't even care about, horse racing. So he gave me this book. It was a compilation, and I think he was with the Herald Tribune for many years. And he wrote these magnificent essays about horse racing. And for the life of me, I can't remember his name. I'd love to have a copy of the book because it really was great prose writing. And you didn't have to know a thing about horse racing. You didn't have to know which end of the horse went into the starting gate. But it was such great writing that you just couldn't put it down. And it was just a whole collection of his essays from the paper. And I'll be darned if I can think of his name anymore. I can't remember.
Was the Herald Tribune?
What?
It was the Herald Tribune?
I think it was either the Herald Tribune or the Journal American. It was one of those papers that was not the Times or the Daily News. So I know it was one of those two papers, and I can't think of it.
David, why don't you Google the words Herald Tribune, racing writer?
Yeah, racing writers, New York sports writers. Yeah, maybe I can find it. But you would agree, I'm sure, if you happen to come across the book and read just the first couple of essays. They're really spectacular. They're not even Damon Runyon-esque in a sense that it was sort of like the underside of horse racing. This was the genteel aspect of the, what do they call the sport of kings kind of a writing that you would expect someone who was really into the sport and knew it intimately and just loved to talk and write about it. I assume talk, but at least write about it. He was fantastic. I might try to find it when I have a few free moments.
Yeah, I would like to know a little bit about horse racing from the standpoint of the owner's involvement. I know that there was a lot of hypocrisy going about with Leo DeRocher and what have you, because the owners themselves were doing a lot of the things that he was accused of. Is there anything you could tell Hal Bock about that?
Well, there are the employees and there are the bosses, and the bosses can do whatever they want. The employees not so much. So Leo, even though he was a great manager, he's in the Hall of Fame, he was an employee, and the owners didn't like to have him doing the same thing that they were doing. That's why he got in trouble, why he was suspended in the 1947 season. But, something that David said rang true. I remember a time, and I'm not so sure it's that way today, but there was a time when the best writers on the newspaper were in the sports department. Now, why was that? I couldn't tell you. But easily, the best, the most readable, the most entertaining writers were in the sports department. And if you got a job in the sports department, you were sitting pretty. I mean, you were in the right place to practice your craft if you wanted to be a good writer, or, not just a run-of-the-mill guy. So that goes back a long time. So does watching baseball games, which don't last 4 hours. That goes back a long time too. I mean, they've made the game. They've changed the game so dramatically. And a friend of mine mentioned it today to me. He said, "I'm going to a basketball game tonight because it'll only take 2.5 hours, not 4 hours. Every baseball game in the World Series has gone 4 hours. Can you believe that? And they start at 8 o'clock at night.
I know.
Which means they're going to end at midnight. I got to go to bed. I'm an old guy. I need my sleep."
Yeah, I haven't made it through one game yet.
You can't. It's impossible.
I know, I can't. No. No. The other night, I forget. I guess it was the second game. You know, they're having the pregame show, and which I don't really care about, and I'm watching it, and the next thing I know, it's the third inning. I fell asleep. Right.
That's what happened to me the other night. I was watching the game 5, and I wanted to see what the reaction was to Trump being in the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember hearing the boos or hearing the chants because I dozed off.
Yeah, right.
That's the way the game is, that's the impact the game has had on me. So I don't know if they'll ever go back to...
The impact the game is having now is that kids don't get involved in rooting for the World Series. I don't know anybody who was a baseball fan as an adult who wasn't a baseball fan when they were a kid. Very few people just pick it up late in life. You have to have some background, somebody to take you to the game, somebody who you can have memories with, how you had your dad do it. I had my grandfather take me to the Polo Grounds. It's got to be when you're young, and what baseball is doing, they're playing to the corporate dollar, which is ever so there. I mean, people are paying buku bucks for seats, and baseball is making buku bucks, and it looks like all is going well, but it isn't because they're not courting the kids. The kids don't get to stay up. If Hal Bock is an adult, if you're falling asleep, kid 7 or 8 years old, no way he gets by the 4th inning.
You can't.
So, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Besides which, they've now made it between innings, 3 minutes between innings.
Yes.
For the car commercials and the other commercials. How much can I take? Play the game.
Yeah, that's a big part of why the games last so long, and you're one of the few people who actually recognizes that. It's the umpires. It's walking out of the batter's box to fix their gloves. But it's no. A large portion of that is the 3 minutes that they devote to commercials between half innings. Now, I'm not quick enough mentally to figure out how many minutes that is in a nine-inning game divided by 2.
It's 6 minutes. It's 6 minutes an inning, and there are 9 innings. So that's
54
minutes. That's virtually an hour.
That's right. Exactly. You're right. Absolutely. Almost an hour. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's just not. That's not workable in my mind. I can't deal with it.
And I've always criticized pro football for being slower than baseball because out of that 1 hour that takes 3 hours to broadcast, the ball is actually in moving by a pass or a run 11 minutes.
Right, you're
They've clocked it. So 11 minutes to watch 3.5 hours to watch something that moves for 11 minutes.
I mentioned this guy on a podcast the other night, and I don't know if you remember Stan Freberg back in the 50s.
Yeah, sure.
Of course.
Well, Stan had this thing about going to a baseball game, the baseball announcers, and it was obviously satirical at that time. Now it's right on. First inning. Welcome to the first inning. We have the first batter up is sponsored by Jiffy Lube, this, that, and the other thing. And for every pitch or for every batter had a commercial in it, and it was so cute the way he did it and so funny. Now you turn on a game, and that's basically the announcement. The Mets are no exception. The tea time is tea time in the Bob Murphy radio broadcast booth, and every time we get ready for a game, we used to get some green tea and get our caffeine that way, and it's 2 and 2 and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, and now they've got a new one this year. Did you see the new one? They split the screen for like a 10-second commercial, so that they get the commercial and even like between pitches. You're seeing the action on the field, but it's only half the screen that you're watching. The other half is a 10-second spot for some commercial or some company or something. And I mean, they're just filling. I mean, there's going to be a time when you're going to see the game through a pinhole. It's just awful. It really is terrible. They're making millions.
The ratings are way down.
Sure, they are.
No question about that. And you have two teams here. Washington is a wild card team who got into the playoffs on a tremendous spurt after starting the season 19-31. That's a great Cinderella story. 12 games under 500, and suddenly they're in the World Series. That's a great story.
Yep.
Houston has won the World Series 2 years ago in a 7-game World Series, a very exciting World Series, and they're back trying to win their second title in 3 years. They dropped the first 2 games at home and climb out of the hole, and now they're poised to win the series. That's a great story. And yet, the ratings are in the hole. They can't draw any fans to watch these games on TV because it's a 4-hour investment of my time. At least what they should have done, and they're afraid of football, they should have played day games on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday. They didn't have to play night games, but they play night games to keep away from college football on Saturday and pro football on Sunday. Well, if you believe in your sport, you go head-to-head, challenge them. Either watch me or watch them. It's up to you. But they don't. They're afraid. They're afraid to do that.
Well, the contract's actually prohibited. I forget who said it on the air, but the contract that Fox has with MLB prohibits Fox from televising any World Series game during the day.
Well,
so there's no way that they could do that. I agree with you completely. I mean, why take Baylor versus Rice as a national game of football when the World Series would be on at the same time? I mean, and it's only, the most, it's 2 weekends that you would have to go head-to-head with football games.
Yeah, exactly.
Or preempt them, or even preempt them.
This is your showcase event.
Yeah. But
give it the exposure. Don't hide it under cover of darkness.
Well, the contract is so ironclad, apparently, and Fox, that's where the bucks come from Fox. So, and it's hard. I'll tell you another reason that I'm down on Major League Baseball this year, particularly, is that the other playoff rounds, the wild card and the ALDS and CS and Championship Series, you have to hunt and peck to find them on TV.
Unbelievable. You're 100% right. 100% right. Every night it was on a different channel.
That's right.
What is going on here? I remember in my earlier years where you could turn on NBC, and it was on NBC. Pee Wee Reese or Dizzy Dean or somebody was the host, not the host, but the color guy, and Mel Allen or Red Barber was doing a play-by-play, and here you go.
That's right.
Now,
and Gillette would announce it to look smart.
Yeah, well, Gillette has been sponsoring baseball since the 40s. The first All-Star game in, I guess it was 43 or 42, Gillette was the sponsor on radio for them. But I actually missed one of the Yankee playoff games. I couldn't find it. The TV listing was incorrect.
It's unbelievable, right?
You missed the whole game, and every night was a different channel, different.
I'll tell you a funny story. Getting away from baseball for a moment, as I've mentioned before on this show, my grandson is a sophomore now at Virginia Tech, so I make it my business to watch the Virginia Tech football games every weekend. Now, last weekend they played a football game, and it was on the ACC network, which is a new venture of the Atlantic Coast Conference. So we turned it on. First of all, I anticipated all day. I'm looking forward to it. I've got my Vatech sweatshirt on and my Vatech sweatpants on. I'm ready, right? So now the game is supposed to go on at 3:30, and I turn on the channel, the right channel, And it's it was on the Yes channel. It was on the Yes channel that day.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yes being the Yankee Entertainment channel.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I turn on the channel, and it's about 3:25, and they're finishing up the first game of the day. I don't remember who was playing. Stay tuned for Virginia Tech and whoever they had to play, Miami or somebody. Okay, I'm ready. Put it on. And they showed the campus, and they showed the team running out. And all of a sudden, I'm watching Yankee highlights. Wait a minute, where's the game? I don't know what happened to it, but for the next 3.5 hours, it was Yankees magazine, Yankees classic moments, Yankees highlights, and I'm searching all over the place for this great Virginia Tech game. By the way, they won the game in 6 overtimes, employing a new rule that the NCAA has put in this year, where if it goes past 4 overtimes, you have to try for a 2-point conversion, and that's how they won the game. It was apparently unbelievable. Now, I can't tell you that it was unbelievable because I couldn't find it. I couldn't see it. Now, why? I haven't the vaguest idea what happened, but there you have it.
Well, it sounds like what I had one year. Maybe this is the answer. Early on, when I guess I got the cable package with some sports channels, and one of the channels was the Yes Network, and I specifically asked, when I was the woman, the operator, the saleswoman at Verizon, I said, well, will I be able to get the Yankee games? She said, oh, yeah, sure, it's on Yes Now. Okay, fine, then I'll have that channel. I'll pay for it. First time, I guess it was maybe it was close to opening day, but anyway, it's right at the beginning of the season, and it might have even been a spring training game. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm watching the pregame stuff, and okay, 1:00, boom, starting the game, 2 minutes, boom, off it goes. And there's a Yankee history of what some year. Well, it turns out that you have to be within the actual Yankee area and pay that fee to get the games. So if you being in Long Island, you probably were nowhere near Blacksburg, Virginia, to watch the game, or some areas in southern Virginia. Well, so I don't know for sure, but that sounds very similar to what happened to me. I'm trying to. I said I can't, so I canceled it. I canceled the service.
The first 2 minutes of the telecast, where they were setting it up, they had the sportscasters. Virginia Tech is 3-4, or whatever their record was, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I'm watching Yankee highlights. I wanted to go over and smack the television.
Yeah, I know. I felt the same way because I said, it was what, $10 a month? This is great. For $10 a month, I get all the Yankee games.
Sure.
No, for $10 a month, I get all the Yes, pre-taped and highlights. And so I canceled it. I just said, I don't need that.
Terrible.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. That's what corporations have done, and what television has done. It's not like the good old days, as they say.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing CBS still doesn't own the Yankees, because God knows what they would be doing to them now, considering how badly they treated the Yankees when they owned the team.
That's true.
Okay. Hal, let me ask you a little technical question about sports writing. And when you first came into that press box, who were some of the people, and you mentioned Red Smith being nice, I know Murray Rose was good to you initially in your career. Who are some of the others that made it easy for you to adjust to the greatest job anybody ever had?
I was very, very fortunate to come to the Associated Press at a time when they had a roster of just the best sports writers you could imagine. You mentioned Murray Rose. He was like a second father to me. I mean, I learned an awful lot from Murray Rose. The baseball writers in those days were Jack Hand and Joe Reichler. Jack Hand was the greatest gentleman you could imagine. He never took his jacket off, by the way. Most people, they go into the office, they take their jacket off, they roll their sleeves up. Jack Hand never did that. He was the ultimate gentleman, and the kindest, nicest guy you can imagine, and talented. I mean, he would write the breaking lead on the World Series, and I said, that's the job I want. I want to do that when he's done, when he's finished here. That's the job I want, and I was fortunate enough to get that job. So those two were, Murray did the boxing. Murray was the boxing writer, and he worked with Jack on boxing. Joe Reichler was the baseball writer. That was his beat. That was all he did. Jack also did a lot of football, pro football. He covered the Giants. Then we had some other terrific writers. Will Grimsley was just he was I can't imagine. I can't give you the word. He was so well known and so well thought of in our industry, and he was there. We had a guy named Jim Becker. Jim Becker was a foreign correspondent. Jim Becker's the guy who gave Marvelous Marv Throneberry his nickname, because he was not a sports writer, but he was in the sports department at the time I got there, and they sent him out to the Polo Grounds one day during the early days of the Mets, and he saw Marvelous Marv do his thing, and he said, "That's marvelous. That Throneberry is marvelous." And Marvelous Marv was the nickname that stuck to Marv Throneberry. Becker was a humorist. Wow. He was a funny man, cool. Very funny writer, funny man. So there you have the heavyweights that were there, and there were a lot of other guys who were at the AP at that time who helped me get my feet wet and get my feet on the ground. And in the industry, well, if I went into the press box at Shea Stadium or Yankee Stadium, Jack Lang was there and Dick Young was there. I mean, these are guys who I read as a kid, and here I am sitting next to them, And you can imagine what a thrill that was for me, even though I was not. I mean, I had worked on World Telegram and Sun while I was in college for 4 years, so I knew all the World Telegram and Sun writers, Lester Bromberg and Phil Pepe, who was my boss, and Xander Hollander and Lou Miller and all of these guys, Joe King and Dan Daniel. These were heavyweights. These were major
Joe King, the Herald Tribune, World Telegram and Sun, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And so these were major bylines, and I'm sitting in the press box, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here? How can I get along with this crowd? But, you find your way, I guess, after a while.
Now, we're talking a day where not only was there the AP and the UPI, but there were 13 daily newspapers in New York. There must have been some writers or some time where the competition for for a scoop, for a headline or this or that, got the best of everybody. Were there some writers that didn't respond well to the family that you had in the press box? So, some people bucked the system, and
I did not experience that. I think that was that came along earlier than when I got there. And I'll give you an example. When I first started writing, when I first started covering games, I covered Ranger games, the hockey, because I had worked for the Rangers for a couple of years. So they thought, well, he knows hockey, let him cover hockey. So I did. And one afternoon, I'm at home waiting to leave to go to the hockey game. The game started at 7:00 or 7:30. And the phone rings in my house, and it was one of my many bosses. And he said his name was Spike Clausen. He was the desk man. He used to run the desk. And Spike said, "Don't ask me any questions, but I'm going to tell you something right now." I said, "Yeah, what is it?" He said, "When you go to the game tonight, you will file after the first period and after the second period, you file running to the Herald Tribune." I said, "Well, what about Ed Sinclair, who was He was covering for the Tribune in those days. He said, don't ask me any questions. Just do exactly what I tell you to do. File running after the first period and running after the second period under his byline to the Herald Tribune. I said, whatever you say. You're my boss. And so I go to the hockey game, and I sit in the Herald Tribune seat, and which was next to the late, great John Halligan, who was the Rangers press agent. And I said, John, what's going on? And he said, I don't know, but I know you got to file for the Tribune. I said, okay, I'll do what I have to do. And I filed after the first period, whatever happened. I don't even remember what game it was. And I filed after the second period. And suddenly, into the press box bursts a desk man from the Herald Tribune. He says, who's writing this? Who's sending this copy? They found out that Ed Sinclair had been indisposed, shall we say. Was unable to come to the game, and he called the AP and asked the AP to cover for him. And I was the designated
without telling the Trib.
He didn't bother telling the Trib. But somehow they found out, and they we blew the whole thing. They blew it open. Our little subterfuge didn't work, but there was none of this. There was none of this cutthroat stuff. Well, I didn't experience cutthroat stuff. There was cooperation. We're all in this together. Let's try not to sink. Let's try not to drown. And although we didn't help each other, I wouldn't go out of my way to help another guy, but we didn't try to kill the other guy. Now, one experience I had, I was covering a college basketball game. Yeah, St. John's was involved, and Joe Lapchick was the coach in those days. And there was a lot to do. What?
With the towel.
No.
He would have a towel on the bench.
No, Joe Lapchick he used to play for the Celtics, the old Celtics.
Yes.
And later coached the Knicks. And now he's coaching at St. John's. And I had to cover the game. And there was a lot of work. When you're working for a wire service, it's a lot of work. So I did my job. I'm writing and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And finally I get done. And I go into the press room where I have to file what they call the PMs, the afternoon paper story, another version of the story. And I need quotes, and everybody's gone. All the players have gone home. All the coaches have gone home. And there was one writer whose name I won't use. He was there, and I said to him, can you give me a quote or two? And he used an expletive, which I won't repeat on the air. He said, I'm not going to help you. No. You get your own quotes. Well, I couldn't get my own quotes. There was nobody to get. So that was one experience that I had where there was not a cooperation, the kind of cooperation that I experienced most of the time at working in press boxes. But by and large,
you had to run into this guy for years on a regular basis after that.
Yes, we saw each other. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And it was hail fellow well met. I mean, not by me, because I'm a very strange guy. Don't cross me, because we'll never make up. Just, let's get along and we'll be fine. But once you do something like that to me, it's good. The game is over. I'm not your pal. I'm never going to be your pal. So yeah, we crossed paths many times. He became a baseball writer. I became a baseball writer, and we saw each other all the time. But we weren't pals. We were never pals.
Yeah, there had to be some distance between you all the time because of that.
Yes, by all means. Yeah. Don't mess with me. And if I ask a favor, it's the favor. We're all in this together. And I wasn't asking him for top secrets of the Soviet atomic bomb. I was asking him for a quote or two. And he refused to give me any quotes. So our story didn't have any quotes. That's all.
So, and
at least you didn't make them up. That's a good way to get
them. I didn't make them up. No. No, I didn't do that.
A couple of reporters in New York have gotten into real trouble for pulling that stunt.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
It takes all kinds, David.
Yeah, I know.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for a terrific show.
Okay.
It's going to be a long winter between baseball games.
I know. I dread it. I told her. By the way, we still want to. Maybe we can get my colleague, who's the expert on minor leagues, on one of these Tuesday night shows. Because tonight would have been a good one, because he really knows his stuff, and it would be an unusual show.
Good. Let's go for that.
Okay, I'll check tomorrow. Check Thursday. See what he has to say.
All right, everybody.
Okay.
It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I have Hal Bock and David Hubler. We're talking sports. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all, and this is terrific. Thank you both for gracing the airwaves, and thank you everybody for listening.
Good night, everybody.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.